Hey everyone, this is Nick from NXT Plants. Today I'm going to be going through and giving an updated nutrient solution and fertilization guide for Anthurium. I'm going to be going through and giving the different types of nutrients and why they're important, as well as what I do, how I apply them, and all of that. So let's get into it. The products I'm using are the ones that I have available to me in my local market. Some of them are from brands that do sell all over, but just bear that in mind. And I think the most important thing is the brand doesn't matter. Most of these hydroponics fertilizer brands are going to have essentially the same chemical analysis. They're going to be derived from probably the same or very similar products, and when all combined, they're going to give you a similar result. At one point I was using General Hydro before doing this, and I was really able to switch the products essentially one for one without any noticeable differences. So just bear that in mind. I'm not trying to, influence you or get you to buy specific products. What I'm going to do is put up the exact composition for each of the products from the fertilizer line I use. That way, when you're shopping or if you're wanting to compare to your own at home, you can just look at the percentages and sort of figure out how yours compares. So I just want to start with that because some of the products I'm going to mention are quite pricey, so I don't want you to feel like you need to run out and do this. To me, this is an investment in the plants I'm growing, and keep in mind I do sell plants, I do sell seedlings, so when I'm using an expensive fertilizer, if it helps me increase the yield or the success rate, it might make sense to me and it might not make sense in your situation. So I don't want you to feel influenced or pressured to buy all of these expensive nutrient solution additives. And like I was saying, I do use this nutrient solution on everything. That includes ferns, orchids, Anthurium, Hoya, Philodendron, Monstera, even my lemon tree outside. I give them all the same fertilizers because at the end of the day, I don't feel like mixing up separate jugs. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about how we figured out, and when I say we, I mean Corbin and I, figured out the nutrient solution and what we like to use. So when we were first getting into this hobby, we were using like Osmocote or other sort of simple one-part add to water as our fertilizer of choice. But as we expanded into making our own pond and doing the hydroponics thing, we realized we needed to step up our fertilizer game a little bit. And so we started using, like I said earlier, the General Hydroponics 3-part plus CalMag. And when we were doing that, we were like, okay, this is great. This was like better than what we were experiencing before. Our growth was better, faster, bigger, healthier looking. And then from that point on, we started to, once you get 90%, you want to like tweak that last 10% is what I like to call it. So I think if you're wanting to start out on a hydroponics fertilization journey, definitely just start with the 3-part plus a CalMag. I think that's like a really good starting point, especially since a lot of the brands now sell a 1-part that does 3, the Grow Bloom Micros, which is what I say when I say 3-part, that's what I'm referring to. A lot of the brands now make a 1-part that does those 3 together in just a more diluted form. So after we did our 3-part, we added some of the humic and fulvic acids. This product, it just happens to do both, and that's really convenient, so that's why we've pretty much stuck to this one. There isn't really anything else like it. And then, we added a kelp supplement, so in this case Super Thrive, and then we were having some issues with leaf shape warping. I'm going to do my best to insert photos. I didn't really take many of them, and we very quickly researched and figured out that the leaf warping in the way we were getting it is a sign of silica deficiency. So from that we started adding our silica. I'm going to talk about more of all of these parts going in. And then at the time we'd been using myco, but that is just a mycorrhizal. So we switched, and we were just ripping through it because every time you do a repot, you use a good amount, and we were just ripping through the bags of the myco. So we switched to the liquid orca, which also has the bacteria. It's super convenient because you measure out a couple mils and add it to your nutrient solution. There's the only difference between this and Great White is Great White has one more strain of mycorrhizal. Yeah, and if you're doing hydroponics and you find yourself spending a lot on myco, I definitely recommend this. It's like a little bit pricey, and here in Canada we're dealing with like a reseller on Amazon, so I think you pay double retail. However, it still works out cheaper than buying like the bulk bags of myco, and we get to apply it with every single watering, which is really useful for helping build that healthy microbiome. Now I want to talk a little bit about the importance of a complete feed and how you can identify potential issues with your current routine. I couldn't really find any good examples of nutrient deficiency just because everything in my collection is getting fertilized probably as much as they can tolerate. So I think what I can show you, hopefully, is some examples of what happens when a plant that previously wasn't being fertilized very heavily starts getting the full feed. So this leaf on this blood moon was the last leaf that came out before my care. And if you're not familiar with the Anthurium, look at this. So this was the leaf before my care. First leaf after entering my care and getting fertilized. Then next leaf after that. Here's another example. Leaf not in my care. First leaf into my care. And this is on a Dressleri. So if any of you have grown them, you know they don't really like to size like that all that often. So one thing you'll immediately notice when you start fertilizing properly, or heavily, whatever you want to call it, is a pretty good size jump in the foliage. What I was trying to find was an example of what potential CalMag deficiency looks like. And what's interesting about CalMag, nitrogen, and whatnot with Anthurium is the importance of sulfur. So Anthurium like quite a bit of sulfur, and what sulfur is going to do for you is it's going to allow them to take up that CalMag you feed them, and then with that CalMag the plants can uptake the nitrogen. So you need all three, because to get each of the, to get nitrogen you need CalMag, and to get CalMag you need sulfur. So with Anthurium, a lot of people like to make sure they're supplementing with CalMag because that can often be a bottleneck, and it can lead you to more chlorotic looking leaves. If I can find some good photos, I will insert them. Plenty of my own issues, but right now nutrient deficiency isn't one of them, because when I see a plant that's doing it, I just add a little bit of fertilizer to their water, and within a couple weeks they will color right up. As I was saying, when you're looking for that, you're wanting to see almost like a yellowing throughout the leaf, and I find often at the peaks of the bumps or bullations, you'll find that's where most of the color will be fading out of the plant. And to me, if I was seeing that in my plants and I wasn't doing anything too complicated with my fertilizer, I'd probably think about supplementing with CalMag to start out. And then once I was a little bit comfortable with that, I would make sure I'm adding something like something to supplement the sulfur and the iron, which just happens to be a kelp extract. It does a good job of helping with both. With Anthurium, I think it's pretty important to make sure you're adding a little bit of extra sulfur CalMag, and that's simply to uptake the nitrogen. You have other issues with like the leaves getting little pinches and little tears in them, and on certain species or certain cultivars like the Ace of Spades, people say the red vein DP, you get a lot of the pox marking around the edges. And the reason silica helps with all of those issues is it reinforces the rigidity of the cell walls, making the plants have a better time fully expanding and making them more resilient to environmental changes and pest pressure, which is what often leads to what people like to call the pox marking around the edges of the plants. I got silica a little bit wrong last time I explained it. The difference between potassium silicate and monosilicic acid, it's not that monosilicic acid is more bioavailable, it's that monosilicic acid is the reaction byproduct of potassium silicate and something like a pH down. So the potassium silicate just requires a lot more pH adjusting. That's the main difference. But potassium silicate does become monosilicic acid when exposed to low pHs. So if you're going to be going the route of potassium silicate, you really need to make sure you're pH adjusting it well below 7. Same goes to monosilicic acid. It's just the potassium silicate is going to require more pH adjusting. And I'm going to try and link a paper that explains it a whole lot better than me down in the bio below. If I don't remember and you really want to see that, comment, and that'll remind me to go link it into the description. Okay, and like I was saying at the beginning, the product doesn't really matter. I'm using Growtech. I like them. They're local to me. I know it can be a little bit hard to find the monosilicic acid formula. If you're looking to use the other one, just make sure you do your research and you figure out how to properly convert it. To make sure I got everything right, because there's a lot of, not necessarily incorrect, but whatnot, information out there about silica and sort of what you have to do surrounding it. So before doing this video, I went and I emailed the GrowTech manufacturer to get sort of their definitive guide and application. That way, at least for these products that I'm using, I'm making sure I'm giving you guys the most accurate information on how to use it. So one thing, they recommend that if you're applying silica, you do it as a foliar feed. Unfortunately for us, the reason we're growing these plants is cosmetic, and foliar feeding, especially with the silica, will leave an unpleasant residue on the leaves that I find very hard to remove. I don't do that. So they did give me the directions on what to do if you're adding it to the nutrient solution, because this tends to be where there's a lot of differing opinions. One thing, some people say monosilicic acid does not require a waiting period after being added to the water, since it's the reactive form of silica. However, GrowTech does recommend you wait 20 to 30 minutes. I also tend to always wait the 30 minutes. So let's just get that out of the way. Also, it should be added first. I know some people say CalMag, but according to the manufacturer, silica first, then CalMag, with a 30-minute wait in between the silica and any other nutrients you're wanting to add. Just wanted to make sure that we had that down, because I've been hearing a lot of differing opinions on that, especially as which order, whether you do CalMag first, whether you do silica first. So I just want to make it clear, you do silica, then you wait 20 to 30 minutes, and it doesn't matter which form of the silica you're using. And that's just to prevent potential nutrient lockout, since it can take a while for these things to properly dissolve into the water. And if they're not properly dissolved, that's when unwanted chemical reactions can take place. So next I want to cover why I like to add the fulvic and humic acids. The big thing about this is it's going to help with your myco. So this will help grow the good stuff in your soil, and it also gives these guys a little bit of something to digest so that they stay alive better in your nutrient solution. Other things it does, it's going to help with how they absorb the nutrients. It helps with that. But the big thing it does is make sure you're building a good microbiome in your substrate. And then along with that, another thing that helps building the microbiome as well as the general health of the plant is the kelp additive. So this one, you're giving some organic material for your bacteria and your myco to digest. The other thing this does is it adds beneficial vitamins and nutrients that are potentially not in great enough quantities in your complete feed. The big things from this is it's a good source of iron and sulfur, both of which are really important for Anthurium. And the second part to that is those nutrients are both more available at lower pHs. So when you're doing your nutrient solution, a big thing, you got to get comfortable using pH down. Stuff very scary, very dangerous, so make sure you're properly geared up and you know what you're doing. Like, you spill it on your floor, it'll eat through your floor, like that kind of, be careful with it. Yeah, so like I was saying, we're gonna wanna make sure we're pH adjusting our nutrient solution. I like to target the range 4.5 to 4.9. I use a pH probe to do it. If you're using a pH probe, you gotta make sure you have the calibration solutions for your probe so that you're keeping it accurate, because they can drift pretty fast. So you stick it in and it tells you the pH. The reason I like the lower pHs is it helps with the absorption of iron and sulfur. Iron helps bring out really pretty colors in the Anthurium. And like I said, the sulfur is for the deep greens, because it allows for the maximum amount of chlorophyll production. And then to my nutrient solution, there's one more thing I often add, and that's a root accelerator. This is just like a rooting hormone. Reason I like it is I find it increases the branching of the root system, and it helps build like really crazy dense root balls. I've been using it for a little bit over 6 months, so as I get more experience with it, I will share more. But yeah, so far I've been enjoying it. I think it makes, I think there's definitely a noticeable difference in the root systems between before I used it and now after. So now that we've talked about sort of the whole fertilizer regimen, I guess I will, like I said at the beginning, I wanted to show the analysis of each of the products. So I'm actually going to just quickly hold up the different ones and talk about the GrowTech fertilizer line. So first off, here's their CalMag. Well, I gotta make sure I'm slid over here so I can put up the graphic. because I'm going to put up the graphics of each of the bottles. Here's their grow. So this is like, think of it as the components focused on foliage or vegetative growth. Here's the bloom. So this is the one that's going to provide the stuff for flowers and berrying. And then here's the micros, which provides all the little other, the non-big three essential nutrients. And so, like I was saying, CalMag plus those three makes a complete feed. So if you're looking to do something like growth tech, the GT foliage focus or the Super Thrive foliage, I can't remember, keep up with the names. That would be replacing the 3 parts. And not all of them always have the necessary, not necessary, as high level of the bloom component. So I know some of them have supplemental additives for the blooming part. Unfortunately, there isn't really like one good one part, because you'd have to just make it so diluted that it'd be very expensive per application. And a big thing with using like these complicated parts is these bottles will last me like a really long time. Whereas if I bought one of these one parts or the fewer number of parts, I would be ripping through those bottles just because of the amount of nutrient solution I have to make every month. Okay, another potential upside to using the hydroponic fertilizers is they're formulated in a way that reduces the amount of salt buildup in your substrate. You do not want salt buildup in your substrate. If your stuff's starting to look salty, just make sure it's not mycorrhizate, because sometimes it will form what looks like a salt on the surface, but it's just fungus. But yeah, if you're seeing salt buildup, I think it can be important to start maybe step back on that plant. I will sometimes just skip a month or two of fertilizing, and I will just like water through with filter water, and then obviously dump it a little bit just to try and flush some of the salt out of the soil and allow the plant to consume what's already there before I'm adding more fertilizer. I'm not the best about remembering to flush, which is why I fertilize like quote unquote like once a month when I give a full reservoir change. And when I do that, I like to water through the top of the substrate just with filter water. I should flush more, but especially with the smaller plants, those are the ones I've had in the past nutrient lockout take place on. I now understand. I've learned to wait until they're at like 4 to 5 leaves before I start fertilizing, which has saved me a lot of issues with the small seedlings I was having. So like definitely be very careful feeding the small ones heavily. So instead of feeding them constantly, I'll just give them a little bit of nutrient solution every once in a while. If I'm starting to notice that they're yellowing or looking deficient. So like if you ever give your plant nutrient lockout, I think the best thing you can do is remove it from the substrate, wash down the plant, make sure the roots are remove any rot, and I would place the plant into fresh, clean substrate, and I would just give it a little bit of filter water, maybe a tiny bit of Super Thrive, but I would avoid any fertilizers until the plant has had a chance to recover, settle in, and then once it's rerooting and growing, I would slowly add back fertilizer. And you can do that by just mixing nutrient solution and filter water on the fly. I should have said this earlier, but when I was talking about the soil pH, a couple reasons I like the low pH is that low pH, it is harder for root rot to take hold, especially at pHs under 5. And the other reason is in the wild, these plants are growing in very acidic soils, and they've adapted to uptaking and processing nutrients and just living at very low pHs. So giving them that environment does aid in the growth, and I think it can be a big contributor to having darker foliage. I said this a little bit earlier, but we fertilize quote unquote like once a month because that's when we do our reservoir changes. Recently we went like 2 and a bit, almost 3 months without swapping the reservoirs on these bucket pots and the plants in here and some of the other ones. We were just topping up the plants that were running out. We were just busy, tired, and it was kind of nice taking a couple months off of having to water. Another benefit of growing in the reservoir pots with these buckets, like I just said, we went pretty much over 2 months without having to water our plants. And we definitely did notice some downsides. Like there's a little bit of root death. The Nov DF didn't flower on this node, which kind of sucks, but it's not a big deal. But yeah, other than like potentially missing out on some flowers, and the foliage not being as dark and luscious as it could be, there weren't really too many other downsides. I don't recommend you guys do it, but it's nice having the ability to go several months without watering without there being too much harm. When I asked you guys for some of your questions about this, I got a few responses about HydroGuard. From my understanding, it's a product that coats the roots to reduce the risk of root rot. It's something I've looked a little bit into. I just haven't, pulled the plug and decided to give it a go. I think it's something I could potentially see myself exploring in the future, but as of right now, I haven't decided to add it. I think, as I was saying earlier, I sort of fertilize by feel when the plants are small until they hit near cataphyll, when I start giving them consistently full strength nutrient solution. And the way I judge it is based off of the appearance of the plant. So if I'm seeing yellowing in a way that is nutrient deficient and not nutrient burn, I know I need to add a little bit more or a little bit less. And I think that sort of topic of identifying nutrient issues requires a whole video of its own with a lot of good examples. I've been thinking Sydney plant guy, what does he call it, his doctor clinic for the plants, where he takes the viewer submission. I've been thinking about doing a similar video for Anthurium issues. It's definitely something I can do in the future. It would just take a long time to make sure I get enough user submission. Foliar feeding. I think I said this earlier, but I don't like to foliar feed when the plants are at a size where I'm enjoying the foliage, just because I don't like the salt residue it can leave. When they're seedlings, I do pretty frequently go the route of foliar feeding when I'm looking to fertilize them. And that's just because it works great. The plants do a really good job absorbing the nutrients through their foliage. Fungal issues in Anthurium. I'm a little bit of a crazy person here. I've been trying out the last few months barely running our fans. So what does that mean? It means I run them maybe a couple hours a day. And I don't want to say there have been no issues, but things have been going okay. And I think it's because when the plants are happy and healthy, they're able to keep at bay any of the fungal issues you could potentially have. And my biggest annoyance with not running the fans has actually been seeing just like a little bit more mold on the surface of the substrate. But other than that, the plants seem to have been doing okay with very little airflow, which I think would normally cause pretty massive fungal issues for most people. I'm very curious. I think definitely before doing the nutrient solution the way I do it now, we had a lot more fungal issues, even with, lots of airflow and other stuff. Whereas now, like, the plants can sit sopping wet, no airflow, and fungal issues are much less of a problem. And another reason I can attribute it to feeding is because in the small plants that I'm not feeding, I do still sometimes deal with fungal issues when they're in super wet environments and they have like water sitting on them and stuff. The last big thing, which is measuring your ppm, so that's how much stuff you've dissolved into your nutrient solution. I can just give you what my ppm is. I just measured it. It's 700. It was like 699 to 701, so I'm just calling it 700. That just represents all of the stuff I've put in and dissolved into the water. So that's about where I like to keep things. I've had it be up to about 900. I haven't gone beyond that, so I don't really want to speak to it. But my fear is if I push it too much higher, I will have more instances of nutrient lockout or burn because I'm not as reliable in my flushing. Yeah, I think that just about covers my whole guide to, why I do what I do when it comes to fertilizing and the products I use, and sort of my thoughts on Anthurium nutrient solutions. So I thank you guys for watching here to the end. I really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.